All right, guys, before I show you how to save a good $400 making your own axles for a J-swap at home, just need to clarify one thing, like I'll do in my last video and I will be doing forward in all my videos. This is what works for me. These are my methods. This is what I've used for years with zero issues whatsoever. How I assemble them, how I make them, what tools I use, etc., etc. It's what I use and what works for me. You're more than welcome to take a page out of my book, copy what you think is going to work, or just copy the whole method. Doesn't matter to me. If you think you can do it better, or you've done it better, or I'm doing something wrong, respectfully, I don't want to hear it. I'm confident enough to know what I do is the correct way for me, and pretty sure various other peoples will agree as well. Again, works for me, might work for you. If your boy makes them cheaper or makes them stronger, I couldn't care less. My cars are still going to work. I've used this on every single J-swap that I've done. Mine car have driven all over up and down the East Coast. It's been easily over 10,000 miles now. Again, constant beating on it without missing a beat. So what I'm going to show you here will apply for any golden era Honda between the EFs, EKs, EGs, DC4s, DC2s, all that stuff. This may be applicable for making your own axles if you're going to do something like, I don't know, a J-swap prelude. I have heard people doing that and working. What axle combinations they use, I'm not exactly sure. Maybe stock prelude and J series, that's what makes sense to me. I have not done that, so I cannot speak from experience. But if you want to give it a try for how much money you're not going to have invested in these, go ahead. I am open as well to constructive criticism. If you think you may have a way for me to improve, I'm always up for improving. But if you're just going to talk a bunch of malarkey, just don't even watch it. I really don't need the view. How's it going, guys? Johnny here from Bad Karma Racing, and today I'm going to show you guys how to make axles for a J-swap on the cheap. Before I start on that, I want to just go over the different half shaft options that you have for these J-swaps, because Honda made a lot. Right here we have two of the more common half shaft options. This one right here is from the 2001-ish, 2-ish, 3-ish Acura TL/CL. And then this one is from the manual, like a 2003 and up, and then 2004 and up till 07 Accords. Now, there is also one that came off the J35A4 that also came off like the 99s, 2000, 2001, 2004s, Honda Odysseys. And they look just like this one, except they have a male ending, which, you know, shaft sticks out. This is a female end for reasons that I hope I don't have to explain to you, because your parents should have had that conversation. This is a male end, female end. Hope you get the idea. I will be making a spreadsheet just listing the various differences between half shafts and what is compatible with what, because, oh, and also the year ranges, because what I just said are estimates. I know most of them off the top of my head, but the start and end the years, I don't know them. I just know by the generations. So the reason why this is important is because you can see there's a male and then there's a female, and then like you can't interchange the axles that go into these, because some are actually 27 teeth on this side of the half shaft, some are 29 teeth on this side of the half shaft. The benefit is, for all manuals, Honda decided to make this end of the half shaft spline in. So these are the same splines for all the manual V6s from 2006 and under. 2007 and over, it may possibly work, but the half shaft will not bolt into the block, because the blocks use different half shaft patterns. As you can see here, even though they use 3 bolts, they're 2 different patterns. There's like 4 or 5 patterns overall. The benefit with the interchangeability, even though it's a little complicated to get your head wrapped around it, You can grab this from a J32A1 and A2 from the Acura TLs and CLs from 03 and under. And this will bolt on to a J35 A4 block, because this pattern right here is the same, and then you're using a manual transmission, I hope. You can use this pattern for the manual. This as well, a little misconception, there is no such thing for the earlier ones as a Type S half shaft. They're all the same. So between the base and the manual Type S and the automatic Type S's, they all interchange. So I have seen some people listing Type S half shafts as like its own specific thing, and they're charging like double what it's actually worth. No, you can go to the junkyard. An automatic base model will work with a 32 A2 block and a 35 A4 block. So with that out the way, and also this has doesn't have this right here. This is just like a protector or dust shield for the axle seal. It's not necessary. If you get one like this one where it might be mangled or just fallen off completely, don't stress it. Chances are you're gonna be just fine. And you know, we have the axle seals here, so I don't lose them. Also, before I move on from this topic, let's say you get a half shaft just like this one. Let me see. Probably can't hear it, but you can definitely feel it. Oh yeah, you can definitely. Doesn't sound good. These bearings are replaceable. You can buy the bearings cheap-ish, $30 to $40. If you find a half shaft and you find that it's crunchy, don't stress it. This comes apart very easily. You do need a press to press it in and press it out. I would always prefer buying one that's shitty for really cheap and then buying a bearing for $30 and then having a fresh half shaft, because that's the only moving part here, for $60 or $70 at most. Likewise, if you find one that's fine and it's not crunchy, you can run it, no issues. Having bearings that are bad do transmit a lot of drivetrain vibrations, and by proxy connected to the tie rods, they transmit the vibrations to the steering wheel. So if you have this like weird issue where you have new axles, new wheel bearings, new tie rods, new suspension, and your steering wheel is still shaking, check your half shaft. Maybe your bearing's going out. I've seen that. I've had that happen several times before. Like I said, I will be making an Excel spreadsheet listing the year differences, what the style is, what it interchanges with, yada, yada, yada. The main takeaway from this is you kind of want to keep the half shaft to the motor. Unless you're talking about, again, the 35 A4s and the 32 A2s and, you know, the base model A1s, which you can use those. They make decent power, I guess, if you find one cheap enough. Type S's are cheap enough as is, so, you know, why bother? But I'm not going to control what you use. General concept, use the half shaft that came with the motor. If you bought a 2004 Acura TL full swap with the drive-by-wire, use the half shaft that came with it. And if you didn't get the half shaft that came with it, get the one for that, and make sure if it's an automatic or a manual block, because for half shafts from 04 and up, they do not interchange from automatic to manual. They're different ones. The half shafts from the 2007 and 8 Acura TL Type S, they interchange with the earlier ones, but the automatic 07 and 08 automatics TLs do not interchange with the manuals. So Honda kind of just kept swapping it up. You can see even I'm getting a little confused, because it's just like it interchanges and it doesn't interchange. So rule of thumb, stick with what you have, verify what you have. There's pictures everywhere. I will be posting pictures along in that spreadsheet just to kind of clarify the situation. All right, cool. So now that that confusing part of the video is out the way, we move on to something a little more simpler. First and foremost, I do not suggest buying insane shafts. Not because they're pricey. They're like $600 for 2 axles. They also suck. I have broken more insane shafts than I can count. I have never broken an axle for like a parts store. It's weird. And then I don't launch on slicks. I've used slicks once in my life. I'm all street tire. I've broken insane shafts on a B series. I've broken insane shafts on an H series. I've broken insane shafts on an F series. For whatever reason, they're so expensive, and yet they suck so much balls. For my swaps, which again are reliable, go anywhere across the country, no driveline vibrations at all, no binding whatsoever. I just make my own axles using aftermarket parts store axles. Now, giving credit where credit is due, even though when I was originally making my own axles, I didn't initially consider what I'm gonna do now. It was a friend on Facebook, Nick Lands. He actually gave me the guidance to kind of figure out the cup swap for myself and make something that works good. So without him guiding me in the right direction, it probably would have taken me a little longer than it did normally to figure this one out. So kudos to him. If you see him, give him a thanks, because made the basis of what we're going to be building upon today. So with that out the way, let's move on to identifying some axles. I have 2 axles on this side and 2 axles on this side. So without even looking at the part numbers, because the part numbers are labeled on the shafts, I can already tell that this one right here is from my target car, which is the car that you're going to be using the intermediate shafts and the hub and the outer hubs from. And then these 2 are from my J-swap cars, which are we're going to be using the cups. These right here, these cups. So the general rule of thumb is you want axles from a B-series equivalent car. What I call a B-series equivalent car is, let's say you have, for this example, a CRX. You want B-series axles from an Integra DA, so from 90 to 93. If you have an EG, you want axles from a DC4. So 94, 2001 Acura Integra. If you have an EK, you want axles from an SI. When you go in the parts store to look for axles, or online, wherever you get them from, just say, hey, I want axles from a 99 Honda Civic SI with the 1.6 VTEC dual overhead cam engine. You'll get left side, right side, and those are your base axles. And then for the cups that you're going to be robbing off them, you will be using the passenger side. Will use, and by passenger side I mean right hand side axle for the half shaft that you're using. So for example, if you're using, like in our example, a J32 A2 half shaft, you will be using a right side axle for a 2002 Acura TL. That will be sure that you're going to get the correct axle that goes into the half shaft. And for the driver's side, you kind of can just get an axle again from a 2002 Acura TL, because the driver's side, the cup for the transmission is going to stay the same regardless of if it's an Accord, if it's a TL from like the drive-by-wire years or a TL from the drive-by-cable years. That side stays the same, so that one doesn't change. What really changes is your base car and your passenger side. So we see here that I have my, I'll just call it Gen 1 for now. So the Gen 1 half shaft from the drive-by cable, and then I have the axle here. And I'm not going to put them in, because then this snapping right here gets stuck in there like it's designed to. But, you know, it threads on, and then with some pressure, it will go in, no problem. So that's why it's important to make sure it attaches to the block, attaches to the transmission, then it attaches to your axle cup that you're going to be using. So, okay, cool. You went out and you bought your axles. Now you have 4 of them. In these 4 axles, there is an estimated $160, give or take, depending on where you buy them. A pro tip that you didn't hear from me: if you buy all your axles from AutoZone, like AutoZone Golds, AutoZone Golds has a lifetime warranty on their axles. So I'm not saying you should, but you know, you make your axles, you go to the track, lasts you fine, no problem. You try launching on slicks at 10 psi with an LSD and a 150 electric shot, and you break an axle. Just go to AutoZone, say, hey, here's the box, here's the receipt. I broke my axle. Make sure, you know, if you broke it at the shaft, take the cups off. You broke from the cup to where it threads on, you know, take the shaft out. Depending on what part of the axle you broke, put it in the box. Hey, I broke an axle, please give me another one. remake your axle, send her home. May or may not have experience doing that. Can't say for legal purposes. Anyway, so you have your axles out and you're like, well, I mixed them all up. I don't know what side is what side. Here's a very quick and easy way to visually inspect on what axles for what side. You see here that this axle is splined all the way. This axle is not. When it's splined all the way, like these are right here, these go into half shafts. And then when it's only half splined, these go into diffs, directly into the differential of the transmission, because this is machined and this is it only needs to be threaded a certain amount, because this is about how much thread engagement you have inside the differential. So it doesn't need to be any more. And then also B series, which now we can touch upon this. Older Honda B series, other than CRV and some weird applications that we're not using here, are 32 millimeters. And by what we mean by 32 millimeters is that the axle nut is a 32 millimeter. CRV, B series, J series all use a 36 millimeter, so the axle nut is bigger. These for racing applications are technically stronger. I have never broken a 32 millimeter axle on the street. I have, when you would break them is right here, when you're making an obscene amount of power. This is if you're making a lot of power and this is the weakest link, and normally would break here. I've never broken one. For stock power, and even for like under 400 horsepower, 500 horsepower, as long as you're not like heavy on the slicks, you're probably never going to break them. Some people love to tell you that you need to go 36 mil, especially for like stock K series. Like I've seen people running 36 millimeters on a stock K20 Type S that's making like 210 horsepower. Like, bro, chill. You're not going to break your axles. Just chill. If you want to go 36 mil, sorry to tell you, this is not the video for you. I have no experience going 36 mil. I never saw a reason to go 36 mil. If you want to experiment with different size cups out of like brands or whatever, more power to you. But I don't do that here. And then finally, before we start actually taking these bad boys apart, I will give one other note. When you buy your axles, buy them all the same brand. So I have had situations where when I was experimenting with this, even before, again, Nick Lance told me about how he did his, I was experimenting with one of the first J-swaps I did, where I had an OEM cup laying around, so I bought an aftermarket axle, and then I tried to marry the two. Each brand, even though some of them are basically all the same, each brand kind of uses their own different bearing setup. Like OEM uses a different bearing setup. This brand might use a different bearing setup. And by bearing setup, what I mean is, or what's inside the cups themselves, it's just like 3 bearings. I was having an issue with that axle. It was just bind. It was rough. It would bind. It wouldn't really turn well because the bearings were incompatible. So I learned that one the hard way. Just if you're going to make your own axles, buy it all the same brand. That way it almost always ensures that they will be compatible with each other. So you don't want to make an axle and then it's binding for no reason because you use one brand and then you used an OEM cup and you tried to put them together, try to save like, $30, and then now it's binding, and then you already went down the street and it destroyed all the bearings. Now you need to buy another axle to replace the one you fucked up, and then another axle to replace the cup. So keep it all the same. With that being said, let's move on. To do this, you really don't need any special tools. I have here, I guess the most specialty tool you would need as a base is like snap ring pliers. But you need just like a screwdriver, some picks, something to cut these clamps on with. And then if you want to spend the extra money, these are like very cheap axle boot clamps. This whole site online, you can find them for like $20-$25. They just basically, replace the clamps that we're about to break right now. I've used them before. For being cheap, they actually hold up really good as long as you apply them properly. This is not really necessary. Before I use those, I would literally just use zip ties. Especially my H2B guys, you know what I'm talking about. H2B, for those who don't know, you have to cut the block down a little bit. And the axle is so close to the block that you can't even run a clamp, a big style clamp like this, because the clamp will actually hit the block. and you can't notch it too much because then you start going into the block, into the girdle or whatever. So you would have to cut the clamps off and use zip ties to secure the axle boot. Again, this works as well. Whatever you decide to do, just make sure that you do it properly. So I normally don't use gloves, but making axles gets really fucking messy because there's just a bunch of grease involved. Yeah, so one other thing before we get started, make sure your work environment is clean. I know some guys aren't fortunate enough to have a clean work environment. They can just do stuff up. Up till recently, I was working on the street, so again, I know the struggles. But if you're doing it like on a dirt patch road or a parking lot, at least lay a cardboard down, because again, we will be working with grease, and the last thing you want is dirt or any type of contaminants to get in your bearing, like a rock or something, and you don't notice it. You put it together, and then that rock slowly shortens the lifespan of your axle. I'm not saying it's going to be instantly, but it might last you not as long as it should. Right now, we're going to start with the easier one, which, not the easier one, but the one that makes logical more sense. So we want to put this cup right here, which is the passenger side axle, on this shaft and axle end right here. So this is for the J series, this is a B series, so we're going to put this J series here. So since we want to swap this here, we want to take the J series apart first, so then we can just put the cup on the side, and then take this apart and quickly put the cup back on. And then, you know, reverse assembly. So we're going to take some pliers. And if your pliers are good, you can just cut this off and just try to be careful not to rip the boot. But if you don't want to risk that, you can just cut it right here at the end and kind of like open it up like a tuna can. And then you're going to want to swap the boot as well, because sometimes the cups are slightly different diameters, so the boot won't perfectly fit on there. Well, at least for this one, I know from experience that the boot will be just fine. It's for the other one that you guys will see why I consider that one the slightly harder one. So just take this out, and then you see all the nice grease provided by the company there. So this is why we want to wear gloves, because we are greasing up a storm. So just scoop some of that up there. Whoops. So we'll get back to that later. Put this on a flat surface, just in case not everybody is as careful as I'm trying to be. So you may have a situation where you come up and then let's say you drop a bearing. Like these can come out if you're not careful. Inside, there's a bunch of little needle bearings, as you can see right here. Those little silver parts are needle bearings. You want to try your best not to have this come apart on you, because if this race right here, even though there is a snap ring on it, or sort of like, some have snap rings, some have like a little collar. This collar can pop out if it's a collar version, not a snap ring version. These needle bearings come out, you are going to hate your life. These will go everywhere. They will get dirt on them. You're going to have to clean them all up, gently place them back in, and hope they don't get out of alignment, and then put them back on. So again, most companies are smart enough now, before they never used to, like really early days, they have this collar on it. Helps prevent from doing that. But in case you happen to get an old stock or some other tomfoolery business, just be careful when you're taking these apart. And then take your clean rag, just lay this down. It's always good habit just to ensure to swap the bearings over. So I should have done that further down. So this is where your snap ring pliers will come in. I have to reverse this first, so have it to spread. And again, that's why you want the clean rag. So first step is to locate the snap ring. It's a bunch of grease. The snap ring will be in this area right here, somewhere along this shaft. So you can just take your pick, feel around for it. So you'll feel like a smooth surface, and the pick will drop like it did right there. And then this indicates that snap ring is somewhere here. So I'll just move all this grease around, or just throw it in the boot. Again, for some brands, swapping the bearing is unnecessary, but just good habit to absolutely avoid any sort of mishap that may happen. Just picked off most of it. Take a rag so I can see what I'm doing. There's the snap ring. And then also, swapping brands around sometimes means that the axles might have a different spline count for the bearing, so they might not actually fit entirely. I love snap rings, especially when they snap and fly across the room. That's my favorite. So for those, I hope you guys have experience using snap rings, because it's not that hard, but there's like a science to them, especially with the cheaper ones. So then slowly take the bearing out, plop it down, and I plopped it down the same way that it came out. So then now, because I don't want to grease everything up again, see, this is why the gloves are really helpful. So speaking of this, the grease seems to be either graphite or moly based grease. People say you're not supposed to mix the grease. I do anyways. Never really suffered from it, but you know, some grease is better than no grease. So I'm trying my best not to tear the boot here. So flat heads to bring the lip up helps. Here we go. That's free. Just out the way. Same concept. Remove this, because now these bearings themselves look different than the ones down here. So it's hard to see on the camera, but these are almost slightly wider than the ones down there. So that's why, again, it's a good habit to swap it all out. Normally I haven't ran into it yet, but normally the splines on this shaft are interchangeable, so should be fine. And then I've located the snap ring, so I'm gonna go so snap ring out, and then now we can slide the bearings out, and then take the bearings from J series, and it should just fall right in. And then you can move it around. You might feel a very, very, very small amount of like back and forth play. That's normal. No gear, at least no mass-produced gear, has a perfect mesh. And then anyways, you really don't want a perfect mesh, because then that leaves no room for the grease to get between them. So perfectly fine. We're just gonna take it now, open snap ring, plop it down, and then now putting them in, so much easier. You want to take a flathead and just press down on the snap ring, all around, like push it into the groove just to make sure it's properly seated. In this case, I just want to rob some of the grease. Even though this is plenty, but a little more never hurt. So now we're greased up. So like I was talking about, you want to be careful to make sure that your boot has a tight fit here, because if not, you're taking the boot off, and then when you're swapping the shaft, it's just going up. So we're gonna take our cup, drop it in, and then just like that, fits no problem. So again, make sure all around that there's no like weird gap. So it looks good. Now, just gonna clean up my hands again. All right, so swapped our bearings over. This is almost done, just needs to be cleaned up first. But general rule of thumb, you never know if you're gonna need it to, you know, return back or whatever, or get another axle. And it just helps with keeping everything cleaned up. So I always just assemble the other side real quick, you know, as is, just drop it in there. And B series cup, throw back in there. And then, see, fits no problem. You don't have to clamp it. It's kind of dumb if you do, in my opinion, because you're not using it. But if you have a zip tie, and you don't like want it to accidentally get all smeared up anyways, just throw one on there. So for demonstration purposes, I will throw a zip tie on just for the people who don't have an axle boot clamp kit or don't want to buy it, because again, that's perfectly fine. It's not necessary. Hope this one's long enough. Nope. So gonna have to school you guys with another tech tip that I hope everybody knows. It's just joining up two zip ties to make one supersized zip tie. So go. Roughly put it into place. Send one side home. Take the other side. And you just accidentally make it too small and miss the mark, so you run it in. And there we go. Tighten it. And if you're using zip ties, get as tight as you can. But and then where'd I put my pliers? Right here. Cut your ends off so it doesn't smack around and piss you off. And then there you go. That does retain all the grease in there. Again, I have done it before. Use good zip ties and make them tight. You're not going to have an issue at all. So this axle technically assembled, but it's now technically incorrect. It is a bastardization among God. It will not fit a J series and it will not fit a B series. So do with that as you will. This one is our love child here. This is the one we are taking care of. So just clean up the grease around the boot, make our lives easier. I hate working with grease, it gets everywhere, but it is what it is. And now we move on to using these clamps. These clamps take a little bit of finagling, but they work pretty good. I can't complain. So I'm gonna go how they work is you wrap the, I guess, corrugated or like this, whatever, side with all the holes on it, and you kind of just hold it on one side and basically try to grab, there's like hooks on this side. You're basically gonna try to grab as many hooks for this as you can on this side. So it's a little tricky, but as you can see here, wrap it around, and then there's like these 3 little hooks. So you kind of want to just push it as tight as you can, as forward as you can. And then once you do that, and you're sure that all 3 of them have a separate hole, you take this tool bobber, and you're putting the clamp between this, and you're just squeezing it together. So it's a little tricky, and you have to be really careful not to like miss the hole entirely. Like I have had luck just taking some pliers and pulling holes just slightly tighter. And then it's really hard to do greased up. There you go. So putting downward pressure on it and clamping it down, just slightly bending that back, and you can see it is clamped. So this is where I crimped it, closed it tighter, and then by closing these 3 holes that I've secured with like this little grabby hook thing that's under it, it pushes the clamp tighter by proxy, making it so it can't come off anymore. So now this is assembled. This is $300 right here. For about $80 in material costs, you have a $300 axle that Insane Shaft would have charged you for, and it would not have lasted worth a damn. Again, I am Insane Shaft hater. Call me what you want. Their product, at least for their street product, is garbage. And then even if you're gonna buy something to like race, Drive Shaft Shop is miles better. Expensive, don't get me wrong, but it's expensive for a reason. So before we move on to the more difficult side, which is only just an extra step, it's not that hard, but 2 extra steps technically, whatever. Little note about this seal right here. This is a sort of dust shield for the wheel bearing on the knuckle, spindle, whatever you call it, whatever you want to call it. This has been known to cause binding, especially on EFs and CRXs, not just for J swaps, but for K swaps, B swaps. It seems like it creates a little too much, like compresses the bearing too much. How exactly, I'm not quite sure. I have had this give me axle bind before, and I removed it, and it went away. So you really don't lose anything by taking this off. You're not going to instantly blow your car off. Just take a flathead, pry it off, and then you're done. Throw it in the garbage. Forget about it. But yeah, you know, axle moves just fine. Articulates just fine. It's going to work just fine. I'm going to move on to the other set now, and then we'll get to where the complicated side is. Before I just quickly zoom and assemble this one as well, the reason why this one is slightly harder is because, as you can notice here, this has 3 indentations on it. And then with those indentations, you can see that there's extra rubber here to accommodate. And for this axle, it's just smooth, like the 2 we just touched upon previously. It's like a specific reason for this, I don't know. Every single one that I've found for the driver's side is like this. So if you just try to swap over the cups without swapping the boots, it will piss grease out. Don't ask me how I know. So what you're basically doing is just adding an extra step. You're taking this clamp off along with the other clamps and just swapping the boot and the cup and the bearing. But thankfully, the axle shaft diameter is the same, even though it's a 32 mil versus a 36 mil. Another reason why I don't see benefit to going 36 mil, unless you're frantically snapping your axles at the hub. Same thickness, really doesn't matter. Like, go right here, digital micrometer. Thickness of this one, 1.03. Thickness of this one, 1.03, 1.04. So same thickness. That's why, again, don't believe the hype. Just, I'm not saying that they're useless. They are needed at a certain point. But for a street car, don't buy into the hype, please. All right, so just gonna magically assemble these. Just take a pause, quick note. When swapping the boot over, you see that these little ridges here. You want to make sure that the bottom of the boot ends up flush with this last ridge. So I've seen people like think that's good. That's not good. And this is not good because now you're past the ridge. It'll kind of like very lightly fall into it, just like so. So you can see if I pulled it slightly forward, the ridge is right there. If I very ever so slightly move it downwards, now the ridge is there. So the reason you want that ridge there because it's basically this clamp sits on this ridge to tighten it. That's how they designed it. That's how it works. That's what you should do. All right, so then now it's just as simple as putting everything back together. So put this clamp on there. Again, snap ring. Want to make sure it's seated right. That was not seated right. So take your flathead and then make sure that it's all buttoned down. Take this, line it up, drop it in. And then again, this also has a ridge. Same concept as a down. So it's supposed to go up against this ridge. If you go, you can go forward. You don't want to go forward. All right, guys, there you have it. How to save $400 on your J-Swap by not buying insane shafts that, for the name, are insanely bad, not that good. These will last several thousands of miles. Like I said, I've ran them in all my cars. Maybe collectively total, there's over 30,000 miles of between different cars of axles that I've made with no issues. I have experienced no axle bind whatsoever. Drive smooth. Doesn't break. I'm not gonna say don't break, but on street tires, you'd be hard pressed to break these because again, they work. Just don't launch on slicks and then break them at the shaft and then complain that, oh my God, oh, they broke. Yeah, you know, like 230 wheel torque at like 3,000 RPM tends to do that on slicks. So yeah, if you like the video, hit the like, subscribe, comment, all that nice stuff that YouTubers want you to do. If you have any questions, my socials are Instagram at cursedy49. That is CURSEDY 49. Can't spell. American school system has failed me. So yeah, catch you guys on another video.